is 7:01 p.m. on my clock. This open meeting of the Acton Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth and the local state of emergency declared by the Acton Board of Selectmen and Board of Health due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the Board of Selectmen have suspended all public gatherings, and in accordance with the Governor's order, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The Governor's order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so the public can follow along with the deliberations and/or board committee votes of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting is convened by video conference via the Zoom app as posted in the meeting agenda town's website calendar identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Meeting business ground rules. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda, if applicable. After they conclude their remarks, I will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps to generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until I yield the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in colloquy with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Okay, our first item is citizens' concerns. Do we have any concerns from the citizens? Seeing none, we will move on to our next item. As you will have noticed, we have Bob Girardi here from Minuteman. What's the full name, Bob? Minuteman Regional Vocational Technical?
The Minuteman Regional Vocational Technical School District.
Wonderful. He's here to talk to us some about the upcoming finances and hopefully help us understand the reason for our, well, we know kind of why we have our large increases, but understand a little better how we get there. As you all might recall, we're going up by another $1 million in the next 2 years by current projections, bringing us, I think, to 2.7 million as our number, which is an awful lot for what we're used to paying. Bob, did you want to present, share your screen, or just talk?
I didn't plan to bring anything.
Okay.
I know that we've met several times and talked about this, so I thought I'd talk through it again and just provide you some updates on what's happened. You know, when we first met with you last year during the budget process, we talked about our budget theme being managing our success. And we thank your district for being one of those communities that supported us in a new building project, supported our programs. And so what happened though is since we've had this new building, the programs have boomed. And so while we lost member districts, the member districts that we have increased their enrollment significantly and has increased their appreciation for our programs. So we projected that the last time. I'm going to give you a little bit more firm numbers this time. And I wanted to talk about how the different aspects of that. So one of the aspects that we talked about when we met during the budget process was that by losing a member district, which we lost Belmont going into this new fiscal year, the Acton assessment almost doubled. In fact, it more than doubled. It would have been half of what it was going into this year. So losing a member district did not help Acton as far as your increase going from fiscal year 20 to 21. The other factor in losing member districts over time is that now you have 9 districts and they're carrying a significant majority of the weight of the cost. Now, we all know that Minuteman and our member communities worked hard to get non-member capital fees and special ed fees so that would help offset some of the costs. But now what we're also seeing at the same time over the last few years is we've had last year, my first year, we had the largest enrollment that we've had in over a decade, a freshman enrollment. So we're having larger classes. Also, last year, we saw the percentages change where it's more member district enrollment. This year, it was almost 100% member district enrollment. So the effect of less member districts and more member district enrollment means that you're going to have less of those fees that we can use to offset your costs from those non-member students. And we talked about projecting possibly all member students, member district students by the year, fiscal year 2023. So in the next 2 years, we might lose that revenue that we've had that we were using to offset your expenses. At the same time, some of our member districts are growing very rapidly, and Acton's one of them as far as enrollment. So for the last 5 years, you averaged between 30 and 36 students. So it was pretty steady. And because we have that rolling average built into our agreement, it kind of flattened things out for you, so you could expect the assessments to be pretty steady. Going into this year, though, we projected that you were going to have 62 students, so almost double. It didn't quite hit that. I think it's closer to 57 or 58. I haven't checked, and we'll know for sure on the October 1st census. But it's in the high 50s. So again, you know, you increased your enrollment by like 48%. And even though the rolling average flattens off the assessments for most of our operating assessments, the rolling average isn't used by the state when they calculate the minimum required payment by each member district. So they just go by the number. And so if you think about jumping from 36 to 57 between last year and probably this year's October 1st census, going into the following year, that's going to increase your minimum required payment. Those are the two biggest factors, losing member districts and the fact that the enrollment is increasing because we now have a state-of-the-art facility with state-of-the-art programming. We all know capital debt is something that you kind of braced yourself for. You put yourself in a good position by voting to exempt it from the tax levy. And the majority of borrowing has already happened. There is one more round of borrowing, but it's relatively small in comparison to the whole project. I think the project is about 145 million, and the last round of borrowing is 4 million. But we're not there yet, but that will have an impact, but it won't be anywhere near as big as what you already braced yourself for and what you've already felt. So that probably won't be as big of an impact as the enrollment and the loss of member districts. But I did want to put that in there too, that is a factor as far as the assessments that we provide. So that's really, in a nutshell, what's impacting your assessment. And I know with ALG, even after we had met before, they worked on a 3-year projection, and they asked us for our 3-year projection. So Christy, you mentioned that you were looking at this year being the highest year, and then things to start, our assessments to taper down a little bit, back down into single-digit assessment increases. And our projection, once we knew that that increase in enrollment was going to be significant, was significantly higher, and it looks like it's for a year or two more, it'll still be double-digit increases, but it's because of that enrollment increase. So, it's great that you're forward-thinking and trying to plan for it, but Minuteman's offering an amazing new school with amazing opportunities for your students, and your community's students are benefiting by that, and people are seeing it, and it's increasing the enrollment. So that's the major reason that your assessments are increasing, and it looks like, based on our shared work, that's going to increase probably for the next couple of years. I will say that at our FinCom meeting, Dr. B did talk about in the past, when we had declining enrollment, we decreased staffing. When we had increasing enrollment, we increased staffing. I can tell you that going in, and he did say that we were going to do our very best in the upcoming budgets to keep our operating budgets low, because we understand that these other factors are impacting our communities. And I can tell you that going into this year, especially with this unusual year where we had to brace for the worst because of the COVID and pandemic, that Dr. B did right-size the administrative staff, reduce staffing costs in preparation for the COVID-19 effects. So we have done that. And we've applied for all the grants we can. And in fact, Dr. McQuillan just sent a letter to your town administrator requesting possibly sharing some of the coronavirus relief fund municipal funds, because we understand now that the federal government's not going to allow us to use it to backfill revenue. So we have some very real increased expenses for communication. We didn't have Zoom before this started. We didn't have a lot of the technology we needed for communication, for parents to hold IEP meetings remotely and be able to sign documents remotely. So there's been a lot of expenses, and so that's another thing that we'll be working with your town manager on, to see if you do have some funds available in the coronavirus relief fund municipal funding, whether we can possibly share some of that. So that's an overview of where we are, what we see for our communities, and I don't know if there's any other questions you might have or details I could help with, or I could take notes and see what I can get for you.
Anyone have questions for Bob? Tahana.
Hi, Bob. When the new school was going to be built, you did lose a few member towns. So can you tell us, and the expectation was that you would add a few more towns. Can you tell us where you stand on that? Is there any update that you can give us at this point?
I know we've been open to adding towns, and we have we have one former member district that still has a significant number of students enrolled, and we have another district that they still have a significant number of students enrolled. So we're open to it. It hasn't happened yet. But if there's interest, we are open to it. But if they don't hurry up, they're going to get blocked out by our member districts, because our member districts are taking up those spots. This year, I think we had less than 10 out-of-district students, because our member district students, so many of our member district students applied in the first round, and part of our process is if you get in the first round, then the second round, where the non-member districts could be involved, they didn't even have a chance. So they better hurry up and decide, but we're open to it.
The reason that I was asking was that it would reduce the financial burden on your current member towns. So I was just curious to know if Minuteman was looking to add other towns.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And that's what I was talking about with the losing the member towns. That had a negative impact on you in just 1 year. Losing one member town had made your assessment go up. Your $277,000 assessment, 150 of that was due to the fact that one member town left. So more than half was due to it. So you're right, and it would be great if we could increase our member districts. We like serving all the children, so we are open to it.
Mike?
Yeah, it seems to me, Bob, that if we got additional member towns now, really there's no room for them. And if they would get spots, it would mean they would get spots at the expense of member towns. So since we're at capacity now, it's just I don't think it's really that likely that we would get member towns. I was also wondering, like, for a town like Belmont that backed out of the district, how do they handle it? Where do those kids go? What are their options? Do you think they would save any money? I don't believe so.
No, ironically, a town like Belmont that left because they have so many non-member member students attending now, their assessments are actually going to be more. And in the future, when they don't have as many spots at Minuteman, they're going to have to pay more to go up to other vocational schools if they can get in. Right now, a lot of vocational schools people are realizing the value of our programs. So the unfortunate part of that is some of those districts their children are going to lose out on the opportunity to attend. But I said that we would be open because there are a couple of towns like Belmont, like Watertown, that still have a large number of students enrolled. And they would be the type of towns where if they were to come in quickly, they might be able to still hold on to some of those seats, I guess. But like you said, Mike, it's only a matter of 2 years before our projections are that they'll be boxed out. So you're absolutely correct. They better get in quick if they're going to get in.
Isha?
I was wondering if there has been a significant change in cost per student over the last couple of years.
A significant change in cost
Per student.
Per student. So actually, the fact that your numbers are increasing means your cost per student is going to go down. I don't have the exact numbers, but yes, the cost per student is going to go down.
But overall, for all of the students, has it gone up or?
Because we are increasing enrollment, it should still go down for all students. So as Mike said, we actually were almost at capacity last year. We're at capacity going into this year. And there's still a little bit more room to grow. So as we continue to grow in total enrollment, the cost per student does go down.
Isha, did you want to follow up?
No, I'm sorry.
Jason, I've seen your hand up.
Thank you. A couple of quick things. First, I guess, congratulations on being a victim of our own success here. I mean, having that many people be attracted to the new school is a wonderful thing, but it begs the question, do we not build a big enough school right from the start? I know there was a lot of rancor about only building a 606-person student school at the time that it was done. And if we're at the point where we're at capacity on a severely decreased, I mean, we lost what, almost half the district? 7 out of 16?
Correct.
Was it more than that?
No, that's exactly correct.
Did we not build a big enough school to begin with?
So, you know, I'm relatively new to this district. I'm starting my second year. I didn't have that history, but I've heard Dr. McMillan talk about it, and I know Mike has that history as well. I see him ready to answer the same question, which is absolutely, you're right. The demand was there for a larger building, and you know, unfortunately, it was a process that was difficult, and you did the best you could, and you built what you could build. But you're right; it should have. You know, I believe the old building's capacity was over 900. Mike, maybe you have the history. You can explain that a little better.
Well, I don't have the complete history, but I know you will know that the old school had a population of 900, and the thinking within the district was that a new school was needed, or the renovation cost of the old school would have been almost equal to the cost of a new school. The problem that many of the districts have, especially, or it was their belief, member towns like Boxborough, for instance, they were not convinced that we'd ever get 600 because they thought the school was sort of really had structural issues with the facility. They just weren't convinced that they didn't buy into the high technology and the vocational education program and the demand that it was generating. They weren't convinced that 600 was the right number. They thought even that was too big, but in order to get funding from MSBA, we were locked into that size, a 600 600 population size. So I think what Dr. Bucquon did was really right-size that school and made it compatible to all. And that's why they were able to adjust their regional agreement, because as it was originally written, you could never get out of that agreement. But by making some compromises, in turn for supporting the new school, some of the towns were allowed to leave the district eventually, and that's exactly what happened. And I think it's going to be their loss, quite frankly. That's my 2 cents.
I'm going to jump in, everyone, for a second. Bob, you had said that, I just want to understand how this gets calculated. Did you say that the state determines the minimum required
Yes,
payment, and that is based on the current year's enrollment,
correct, yes. So
not
they
the
just go-
rolling?
Well, not the current year, the October 1st of the prior year, because that's the only number they
Okay.
officially know. But yes, the minimum contribution is calculated by the state and told to us. So that, in our formula, that's one piece, but then the transportation and the other operating expenses are based on a 4-year rolling average to try and flatten out some of those spikes. And that helped the formula, but we can't change the minimum required contribution.
Mm-hmm. Now, is that a blanket just for being part of the district, or is that a per student? How does that number fit in?
Yeah, that's the state deciding for each community. It's the same for your local school as well. The state calculates the minimum requirement for Acton Boxborough High School.
Okay.
It's for your districts as well, but they do it for all districts, and for us, they do it for our district as well.
And then we pay a tuition per student on top of that?
So that's part of the tuition. That's how it's calculated out. So in our budget book, there's a page that shows the formula. If you get a chance to look back at it, you can look on page 32, and you'll notice that under the operating assessment, the state required minimum assessment is the first category of expenses, but then we calculate out the transportation and the total operating assessment based on the 4-year rolling average. So we soften it out a little bit that way, because there aren't too many districts, especially quality districts like in Acton, that would be able to survive with just the minimum requirement, but they increase the minimum requirement based on the actual student enrollment from the prior year.
Thank you. Who else? Jason.
This is not so much a question as a comment. It appears to me that this building project was done over a number of years with a bunch of different bondings, both bands during the building and a number of different bondings as the building finished. You just said that you believe we have one more to go. Please, dear God, tell me that's it. It feels like you've had 9 or 10 bites at this apple. Please tell me you're finished.
My understanding is that we have there was actually 4 borrowings. There were some bands in between that were required to cover cash flow, quite frankly. But because we're like our own municipality, so we have to be able to cover cash flow. But we've been fortunate. There's one last one. There were 4 planned, 3 have already happened, and they were the larger ones. And then the last one is basically like the closeout. So it's the last one that is due, and that we're very close to the end of our project.
And that's it, right?
That's it. We're waiting for the certificate of occupancy, and then we can finish it off with MSBA and get all the numbers finished. So we're very close to the last piece. So
Thank
it's
you.
just one.
Christine.
So COVID certainly brings its own, unique challenges, especially in the world of recruitment. My son is a freshman at Minuteman now, and what hooked him initially was your presentation, in our junior high auditorium to the 8th grade class. What are you guys looking at this year as far as reaching out to my current 8th grader and other 8th graders? And are you concerned that, enrollment might dip a little because of that inability to get in front of these kids and bring them in and tours and all of that?
Well, I think like everybody else, we have to move to a different model, right? We can't have large gatherings anymore. So my understanding is we're going to have much smaller events and even individualized tours for families as requested, so that they get that. Like you said, it's amazing when the kids actually see the opportunities that are there for them, and they see the exciting staff and the work that they do with students. It makes it real for them. So yes, we have to find a way to do that. We are also using some of our video talent, and we're going to be doing some more videos so that we can use that medium to help kids see what we have to offer to get them to come and visit. So yes, the answer is you're right. We are worried that we won't be able to do the larger gatherings that we've done in the past, but we are going to have much more small gatherings in order to still recruit and just provide kids with options, let them see what they can actually, how lucky they could be.
Okay. Thanks.
1 second, John. Is there anyone else on the committee? All right, Dave.
I'm just curious how the dynamics work with these towns that had, the Belmonts of the world is, obviously they have alternatives for this type of school, and as do students in Acton, technically speaking. But what's your sense of how they could get inclined to come to the school? I understand that it's nearing capacity, but it sounds like if even if we get the capacity at the school in its current form, that it's going to be the costs are going to remain elevated under that scenario. And is it even reasonable to market to these other towns that have bowed out, and are they just going to get crowded out by in-member towns?
So the numbers were overwhelming in that there were even more applicants this year from some of those towns than in the past. I think maybe it's a national movement, but people are appreciating vocational education and what we offer. So I think that we have that on our side in addition to recruitment. People are realizing that the value of this education, and also the fact that we're a blue ribbon school, we provide an amazing education. People understand that. But to your point, they're getting crowded out. And I don't know, to Mike's point, what options they have, because other vocational schools are seeing the kind of growth we are too. So that's unfortunate for their students. We hate, for students to lose out on this type of education. But they are going to, it appears that over the next 2 years, they're going to get crowded out, even if they are applying in large numbers.
John? You need to unmute.
Yeah, Bob, what is the anticipated capacity?
I believe it was 628, or John, Mike, do you remember what the number was? It's in the 620, 638, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's like 628.
Yeah.
And how many are enrolled now?
We were at 602 this year, but we're going into next year. I think it's going to be 658.
Okay, so it'll be above capacity.
Yeah, now that's the capacity is like a standard formula, but we all know that gymnasiums can hold large classes, that theaters can hold large classes. So we will be able to increase that enrollment a little bit, but I don't foresee us increasing it that much more. That's like the standard building, the standards for building, but they can increase a little bit more.
How many, for the current freshman class, how many Acton applicants were there?
I'd have to look up that number for you, but I believe the end result, like I said, was from 36 last year to 57 this year. The last time I checked.
There were in the high 60s for applicants.
Oh yeah, there were high, yeah, definitely there was high 60s in applicants, but
for the freshman class?
Yes. So unfortunately, some students didn't even get to attend.
You're not the only district. Do you know how many were accepted of the 60 plus?
I believe it was 57 to 58.
Does that sound right, Christine?
It does, and it's not that all of them didn't get accepted. Even some of them pulled out, prior to. But that sounds about right.
Then how many of that 57 enrolled and are there now?
I believe most of them are, but we won't know for sure until the October 1st census. That's the.
When you say most, no, when I said from the freshman class, you said, the question I was asking was to get an idea for the next couple of years, the class that just entered, how many applicants were there this would be for the class of 2024.
Yeah, so as Christine helped me, there was over 60, about 57 or 58 committed, and
Or accepted.
They accepted. They accepted and committed. It's a process, and as Christine pointed out, sometimes they'll accept, but then at the last minute, they might change their mind just before school starts. But I believe that the majority of those 57 or 58 are still there, but we'll know for sure on October 1st.
Christine, do you know how many Acton kids are there in your son's class are enrolled now, freshman class?
I don't. I don't know.
I'm sorry.
Right.
57 was the total. You want to know the freshmen?
Yeah. The question
Yes,
is,
I
how
got
many
you.
freshman applicants were there?
I got it.
How many were accepted and how many enrolled?
This is old data, so it probably changed, but let me see if I can find that for you. Going back to when we did the presentation, we actually had a slide on that. So let me see if I can find that for you.
I can tell you there's at least 5 or 6 of them from McCarthy Town alone.
Okay.
From that school.
I had understood there were around 30 applicants for the freshman class.
My recollection from last year was that it was going to be closer to 40, but I don't know. That was the expectation, not who actually necessarily applied.
Yes, so back in February when we presented, at that point there was 29 offered admission. So there were 29 that were even offered admission, 18 committed to enroll, 11 were waiting at that point. But now, that was pretty early on, so I'm sure that those numbers increased.
And Bob, were you saying that you'll know the final number come I think you're calling it census in October?
The final number for the total number, not just the freshman class, is around 57 or 58. And we'll know that for sure on the October census.
Now, for our projections going forward, the estimates that you made for us over the next few years, is that assuming the same level of freshman incoming class?
Yes, and probably slightly higher. Let me see if I can pull that file up as well. I think we projected the trend. So since it increased, significantly between last year and this year, we did, as part of our assessments, assumed an increase in enrollment, total enrollment for the following year as well, which is why you're seeing that increase, the assessment increase.
Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah. So I think we should get, when October 1, it would be good to know how many are enrolled, because that's a number we could use to project ahead, because you could have anywheres, in the next couple of years, 4-year cycle getting up to 75 or 80.
Well, and that's what they've given us an assessment projection for the next 2 years out.
Mm-hmm.
Also, that's on the ALG spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm. Have all of you taken the tour of the new school? Adam? Yeah, it's a worthwhile tour.
Yeah,
I'm the only one, I think. I haven't taken the tour yet. I couldn't make it the last time.
You're certainly always welcome. If you give us a call, we'll be happy to give you a tour. We're very proud of it. It's still, it's interesting. We have 25% of the students in as part of our hybrid model, but it still feels good. It's nice having the students in. The closure was really tough on us.
Now, Bob, you mentioned the idea of you mentioned that you had sent a letter to the town about trying to get some of the funds is that CARES Act funds?
Yes, it is. The CARES Act had funds for schools, which was the reopening schools grant. And then they had CARES Act or coronavirus relief funds for the municipalities. But our understanding is that that the municipalities, we're hoping that they would be able to use that to offset reduced revenue. And the federal government has not given in on that. As we know, unfortunately, it's kind of a stalemate right now. And so there's a deadline coming up that these funds have to be spent by December 30th. And nobody wants to give back funds to the federal government. So if the municipality can help out its school districts, and I'm confident that the town administrator has probably had the same conversation with Acton Boxborough High School, with your local schools as well. But if there is an opportunity to share some funds, we sent a letter just to show some of the expenses and increasing in PPE. And like I said, a lot of it was technology. I don't think K through 12 schools were ready for full virtual online, and the hybrid model is, still 75% of the students are learning online, or you're learning at some point online each day. And so that requires a different level of digital communication.
Now, there was some discussion about whether the Acton Boxborough School District would ask money from the towns. And one of the points brought up was that if they did that, they would probably need to ask both towns proportionally in the regionalization agreement. Is that something that comes into account here also?
Absolutely. I worked with Dr. McQuillan on the letter. He asked me to figure out the formula, and basically we did it based on the 4-year rolling average. Each town, we identified the cost, and then we identified the town's percentage. In Acton's case, you're about 10% of our enrollment. And so for the district-wide needs, we asked specifically for about 10% of that expense. We did identify that some of our juniors and seniors are having challenges with our computers that they have, the district computers that are provided for them. And so instead of asking the towns, I'm preparing the letters for all of our member districts. So any district-wide expenses like the cost of Zoom, that's a district-wide expense. So we're just asking for 10% of that. But specifically for computers for specific students, we identified the number of 11th and 12th grade students and said, we wouldn't want you to have to pay for non-member students' computers, but that if you could help us out with the cost of computers just for the juniors and the seniors, that would also be appreciated. But that way, I think we even made it a little more fair. Instead of, just like I said, district-wide costs, that kind of makes sense. That would be the member districts carrying their percentage. But for something very specific for you, we didn't want to charge you for non-member expenses. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. Thank you. Now, while we have Bob here and with an ALG meeting coming up on Thursday, I would love to hear people's thoughts about the potential use of the CARES funding this way. And with Bob here, any questions can be asked of him. Christine.
Sorry, Christy, I just wanted to point out when it's appropriate that we do have a participant who has a hand raised. So I'll leave that up to your discretion. I just wasn't sure if you could see them. You're muted.
Thank you. We are not taking public participation at this time. John, I see you, but hold on
Sure.
for that. It seems to me that this is a expected use of the CARES funding. So I am comfortable if the town cannot use it in any other way direct to our town's specific needs. This is a town-specific expense that we have. I would love to hear other people's opinions on the topic. Roland.
Well, if it doesn't get covered out of CARES Act funding, with the different towns are going to cover that money somehow to pay for it, or the district is going to have to come for it, of course. So what's going to happen? Then they're going to come to the town for it anyways, another one. So with the pay one way or the other. So it doesn't bother me if we take it out of CARES Act funding or however we pay for it. It's gonna have to be paid. Now it's kind of nuts and bolts of it. We're part of the district. Everybody shares the expenses, and it's an expense that, even though it's unforeseen, it's still an expense of running the school, and that's basically what I get to say.
Bob, that raises an interesting point. You had mentioned the idea of excluding debt earlier. This, I presume, would not affect assessment increases later. This is just on top of, not that you do a percentage increase in the same way that the towns do, but.
Yeah, so we've tried, like I said, we've tried to reduce expenses going into the budget, into the school year to offset some of these expenses. And we've already been fortunate that the grants that have come through. It will, as Roland was saying, eventually it's going to be part of our operating costs. The reality is this is the new norm. And so these sort of things are going to have to be purchased every year. For this year, a significant portion has already been funded through the 2 grants that the school districts have received from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. A portion of the PPEs, which you'll see, when you get a chance to see that letter, 75% of the PPEs should be covered by FEMA. But to Roland's point again, FEMA takes 18 months to fund it. So it doesn't help us in the upcoming budget. We'll see that revenue in the following year, but for the upcoming budget, it's still going to be some of those expenses aren't going away, to Roland's point. So if we can have federal government support one way or another, whether it's through FEMA and we don't get reimbursed for 18 months, or whether it's through the CARES Act and we do get reimbursed more quickly for those funds, it kind of makes sense to use that funding.
And now I know for Acton that one of the expenses, obviously a significant one, was purchasing the technology, so it's just the laptops for everyone. That has an ongoing life. It's not like the PPE that gets used up. I presume some of that was added on to this budget.
So we purposely felt that our one-to-one initiative for our freshmen was our obligation. We had already budgeted for that. Okay. We didn't ask for that. What's happened is now that we've been implementing virtual learning, we're realizing that the software is more sophisticated that the teachers are using, and so it's the junior and the senior students have older computers that are having trouble keeping up with that kind of technology need, and so that's why we felt that was a legitimate expense, because it was a result of coronavirus putting us into this virtual world. But the one-to-ones for freshmen, we did not expect, any of our. That's part of our budget. We had already planned on it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or ideas about using the, one second, John, about using the CARES money for this? Steve.
Yeah, well, if there's a line forming, there was some discussion at the Health Insurance Trust meeting as to whether we could find any of the CARES Act money that was left over.
All right. John, you want to say something?
Well, Bob, I was talking with John Mangiarotti, our town manager, late this afternoon. He indicated he had heard from Dr. McQuillan, I believe, that you were looking to the member district, the member district for about $150,000, and the requested number from Acton was $40,000. And then Christina, I think we will learn at our ALG meeting on Thursday morning that the schools will be making a request to the town for $500,000 in CARES money for technology stuff. I don't know what the Boxborough component over and above that is.
So comparatively, our request is pretty small, but it is 10% of our expenses. When you look at our expenses, they've been over $350,000, which kind of makes sense, right? If Acton Boxborough's asking for $500,000, that's an even bigger school. But we already had grants cover a significant portion of that. So as you said, John, about 148 still hasn't been covered, and then your 10% is about the 14,000, but then if we add those computers, it ends up being closer to 40,000. So our request is smaller, but John's right on the button with the numbers, pretty darn close.
All right, does anyone else have anything else for Bob here? Thank you very much, Bob. It was a pleasure having you. I appreciate you coming and answering all these questions.
Thank you, Bob.
Yes, well, we appreciate Acton being a great supporter of our district. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Take care.
Take care.
All right, it is now time for any town updates. I think we don't have anyone. Oh, there we go. Brian, do you have anything that we should know?
Yeah, thank you, Christy. Just a couple of quick things here. So I just want to give you an update on collections through the first quarter of FY21. So we're still at about that 97.8% collection rate. So kind of interesting enough, we kind of look back at this point, the last 2 years, and pretty much right on track. We're at that same level. So we're really not seeing any deterioration in the receivables as far as tax collection. So we're trending right where we have been the last couple of years, and which is not really a surprise in what we've seen, you know, through this whole event, which is COVID-19. So our citizens are paying, and we're doing okay as far as collections. The other thing I just wanted to mention as well is the second quarter tax bills will be going out the end of next week. So those will be hitting the street soon. And that's pretty much it. I know we sent out notification on kind of year-end turnbacks. So as reported out back in August, Steve Barrett with a memo to the Board of Selectmen, the town's anticipated turnback, and again, it's unaudited, is about $1,389,165, I believe, the number 195, of which a good portion of that was some savings we had in salaries and benefits, primarily due to John kind of shutting down operations when COVID-19 hit. Any open positions were kind of put on hold and frozen at that time. So there was some significant savings there. But we have a memo that's been produced, and I believe, Christy, we sent that to you. I'm not sure if you shared it with the FinCom, but it kind of details of where some of that turnback came from. So other than that, that's pretty much all I have for this evening.
Thank you. Steve, we're going to talk about turnbacks when we come to point of views.
I have a question for Brian.
Certainly.
So how much leftover COVID relief money do we have? Everybody seems to be lining up with a number.
Yeah, so, you know, and I'll throw some numbers out there as best I can, but and maybe John Benson might have a better idea. We had about $2.1 million that were allocated for the town. I believe we submitted, and we got, I think, $200,000 that we've used so far, so it reduced it to 1.9. There may have been some additional, so I think even with, you know, the schools coming forward and asking for some money, and maybe HIT or whatever the other opportunities are, I still think we're in pretty good shape. We're actually have a conference call tomorrow with our consultant at 9:30, so some of this will probably, you know, come out in that meeting tomorrow on that Zoom call, so I'll have a better handle on it. But I'd be happy to report back or send out, you know, some kind of a memo of some sort on where we stand with the CARES Act money. And John, I don't know if you have anything you need to add, or if you have any more ideas on where we sit, but that's pretty much what I know. Right?
Yeah, we could. I think it was about 200,000 or 300,000. There was another $50,000 that we were going to request for the rental assistance program.
That's correct, right.
How does the cash flow work for the CARES Act money?
Well, they don't they didn't put $2.1 million in our checking account. You have to make the request to the Department of Revenue, specifically what is it for, and they determine whether it fits the guidelines, and then they release the money. And you have to be real careful with it, because if you don't spend it on what they've approved, they can claw it back and the town's liable.
But we do, in the case of something like PPE, we don't buy it until they've given us the money.
I'm not sure how the bookkeeping.
I guess PPA is FEMA.
There was FEMA stuff that FEMA reimburses 75% for, and you would pick up the other 25% from the CARES money. So there's some shuffling there to make it to become whole.
But we just heard that FEMA takes 18 months to pay back, so I was wondering if
that was new to me. I did not. John has not mentioned.
Just kind of as a follow-up, and I don't know if you guys recall, but back in June, I think, or it might have been early July, but we had to submit a document to State Department of Revenue anticipating what we thought would be the total drawdown right now for the COVID-19 expenses that were CARES Act eligible, and we put a submission into the state for $750,000. We pretty much, it was kind of a higher number, but we get authorization from the state for fiscal 20 to spend, or at least to deficit spend $750,000 where they wouldn't hit our free cash number. So that was for fiscal 20. So obviously we're in 21 now, so it's kind of a whole new game. So we just made sure that we weren't going to hit that ceiling. So we can deficit spend, but like John Benson just said, we got to make sure that, we're not deficit spending where we're not going to get reimbursed as well. So we're very careful about where we're going to get reimbursed before we deficit spend.
Thank you. Any other questions for Brian? Okay. John, do you have anything you'd like to update us with?
Yeah, I had dropped the FinCom and the Economic Development Committee a memo with 2 attachments on our achieving the 10% safe harbor. And one that I wasn't aware of, we got an additional housing production plan, 2-year safe harbor, based on the Powder Mill project. So that will carry us through it's August 10th of 2022. And I thought that was something I wasn't anticipating, but that does give us some extra time in making sure we hit the 2020 reset number on the 10% safe harbor. So we have one project that's pending now that I wrote about, the 446 Mass Ave, or I think its real name is Residences at Kelly's Corner, which is a 31-unit senior affordable and disabled housing, which is funded through the state. It's not through traditional, bank financing. And that's very competitive. And the update I have there is the developer was invited for what they call a short round financing, which he has to get papers in by the end of September, and he will know by the 1st of November whether he gets his financing. If that doesn't work, there's another round that starts the beginning of next year. That's a more extended round. But it's all, the fellow who is doing 446 is the fellow who did the high school commons project, which is 15 affordable rental units built in the old high school, the old town building. And that project took 10 years from start to finish.
Thank you. Any questions for John? Okay, let's move on to the point of view. Christine, before you put anything up, I would like to open the floor to Steve to talk to us about his opinion based on what we've seen about the unaudited turnbacks for the school and the town.
Thank you, Christy. This is not necessarily a well thought out. It just occurred to me over the past couple days this weekend. Maybe I have too much time on my hands. Even a retiree can say that these days. I get exhausted babysitting 2 days a week, and so, by the time Sunday rolls around, maybe, my head's cleared. And I was thinking about turnbacks. So this year, it sounds like we've got another, 1.8 million combined turnbacks. It's actually a low number relative to the last 5 years. Last 5 years in total, we've had $14 million worth of turnbacks. So the average has been 2.8 million. And coincidentally, the 2.5% increase is around $2 million a year. So in the last last 5 years, we've increased the taxes by about 9.8 million or 1.9 million average. So there's a couple of ways you can look at turnbacks. You can look at them as good management, that we characteristically underrun our targets and overrun our revenue numbers each year. The half-empty person would look at it as it's overtaxation. Every year we tax more money than we need. Now, I'm not about to throw the whole concept out the window, but I was thinking that maybe this isn't the best year to overtax. You know, there's a lot of people with a lot of problems out there. And if this next year coming up is much like the last 5, then yeah, we could not do a 2.5% increase, and probably our turnbacks would cover us. But then again, there's looming questions for maybe not even 21, but 22, 23 about state aid and all sorts of other things that could happen. So rather than just say, well, let's just not do the 2.5%, I think we also need to look out into the intermediate term and say, you know, it's been 10 years since we actually took a hard look at costs in this town. And I think I shared some of that report from back in 2010. It was a 3-board committee. It was the Board of Selectmen, FinCom, and the school committee, and took a fairly comprehensive look at where the money got spent and whether there are any opportunities to save some money. So I guess I would say them throwing this out for discussion more than anything is, would we like to propose in the point of view that we not do the 2.5% tax this year, and that we convene a group. Obviously, we can't convene a 3-board committee, but invite the other committees to participate in a cost savings committee to maybe make that 2.5% cut permanent.
Reactions, opinions, responses. Roland.
I think we should put that in the point of view. I mentioned something last year to the town manager. I felt the increase was too high. And, well, we were within your budget of what you guys recommend, your point of view, and, you know, not an increase of 3%. And I'm like, we really have to really look at that. And especially this year, I think it's a good year. I mean, we just had a huge increase last year due to the fire station and schools. You know, our average tax bill went up 7.25 or 7.5. That's a heck of a lot more than 2.5, as we know. But again, there was the override. So I think this would be a great year to do something like that, and to convene or put together a group, invite the other ones to attend, to join with us, and see where we can look at reduction. You know, we used to buy a big chunk of property, which I supported, and I think that was a great idea. What we do with that building, it's the emergency management building we're not using in South Acton. Hopefully that will get sold and we can get rid of that. But we have to look at when we have that house sitting there at Morrison Farm. I don't see why we can't do something with that. Get that, maybe work with Habitat and figure that out. So they carve out a lot and have a Habitat for Humanity in there and get that back on the tax roll. Even if it's not at full value, something. So I really think that these things have to be looked at and should be looked at in depth of us owning a house that we don't use and have no need for. And it's just in there basically eventually end up falling down because it's being used. So I think there's a great idea to do something like that.
Anyone else? Jason?
I think that I understand where the turnbacks come from, and I understand the flexibility that it provides the town to be able to have a much larger, or that's overstating it, to have a pool of money that they don't necessarily need to meet, because at the end of the year they'll just give it back. I fear that it allows for a lack of urgency. If you've got a couple of percentage that if it comes in, great, you'll turn it back, and if you need it, you spend it. I feel that the turnbacks have gotten too big, have gotten counted upon too much, and that it just encourages us to continue to have large increases each year with less of a sharp pencil. So I think, first of all, I think that the increase in tax last year, anything over and above the schools and the fire department, should have been a lot more closely watched. And I lost that battle routinely. But now that people are starting to get the sticker shock of that, it's more like 9% increase. Yeah, we're way overdue in sharpening our pencil. So not only do I support the making sure that we don't allow for such a large slush fund each year, as a separate topic, which I'll talk to when we get deeper into the point of view. I definitely believe that our history of being above our reserves target needs to stop. So yes, by all means, if we can find some cost savings, great. Sure love it if we stopped wasting money along the way too.
Dave?
Real quickly, I'll just echo Jason's point. I think sharpening the pencil is a great way to put it. And it has been a long time since we've really taken a hard look at this. And the fact of the matter is, as Steve pointed out, there's a lot of households under a lot of pressure now. And we talked about this, I think, 2 or 3 meetings ago. Is this is an opportunity just to take a look at a lot of sort of costs that maybe sat there for a while, and it's been the economy's been strong for a while, and now it's in a much weaker state, and now we need to just take a re-examine things. So I wholeheartedly support it. And if the question is, do we bring this to ALG, I would say absolutely, and then maybe the ALG or whomever we could sort of filter through that and figure out where we start looking at individual more the items that actually would flow through to this. But I think it sounds like a great idea.
Playing slight devil's advocate here, when things first started going bad, Steve specifically said that when making adjustments to the budget, as we didn't know how COVID was going to play out, that we needed to make sure to not cut staff and thereby services, that should be one of the last things we cut. Staff is such a huge part of our budget, and they are fairly directly tied with services. Are we proposing that that's something that should be looked at?
I believe everything should be on the table at this point.
Roland?
Absolutely, staffing levels should always be looked at. It shouldn't be done in a vacuum. It should be done overall with what the services and the needs of the town are. And I think John's done a good job with not filling positions this year. But I really think that we do need to look at that overall, the bigger picture of not just town hall staff, but every department, whether that be engineering, highway, transfer station, schools even. Have to look at that too. And every department, I think, needs to be looked at, or at what is the appropriate staffing level. My company does it all the time. We're just fortunate, I guess, of actually hiring people because we have more demand and we need staff to cover the client-facing roles that have to be done. So but my wife's company and other companies, I know of other companies have been cutting staff. And that's just market demand and what happens. And the town really should be no different than that in a lot of ways. That what are the needs of the town? How can they best be handled with the least amount of staff? I'm not in favor of just going out and cutting staff. I'm just saying what other staffing levels that we need going forward. And as people retire, maybe you don't backfill the role, you don't fill with somebody else. You just do without if you don't really need that.
And Christy,
Yes.
if I could just interrupt and say one quick thing is, I think when that comment was first made, that was months ago, and
Yeah.
I do think we know what the more or less the normalized situation is now. 4 or 5 months ago, I think there was a lot more uncertainty out there, and I do think the environment may have stabilized, maybe not how any of us would have envisioned, but it does seem to be less volatile than it was, a few months ago. And I think when Steve or whomever first made that comment is, you didn't know, 2 months from then what the world was going to look like. And I think with a little more confidence, we can say what November might look like, hypothetically, or 2021 might look like. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but things have calmed down a little bit from 4 or 5 months ago, is the only point I'm making.
Well,
Steve.
one thing we could do is, I know a few years ago I worked with some people on the comparative study for the schools. And part of that was just benchmarking against comparable towns to see what their costs and their staffing look like by functional areas. So that could give us a clue. The other thing is that staffing doesn't necessarily, looking at staffing levels is really looking at compensation levels. And there, I mean, I think most of our employees are probably covered by collective bargaining agreements, and I think some of the bigger ones are already set in stone for the next couple of years. But healthcare is negotiable, I think, every 3 years, and this is the year when it's negotiable. So we could talk about cost shares and co-pays and things like that. I mean, it's a way to impact the overall compensation number.
But I don't hear anyone. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think, if the corporate world is able to deal with redundancies and affect their profitability or their budgets, local government could probably do the same, but it would be more difficult because it's more of a service industry, and it's you cut staff, you cut services. But I think if we instead looked at the long-term capital needs, 5, 10, 15 years, big projects that might come up, I think by maybe quantifying the budget impact of each one of those major projects, and then we could manipulate the schedule a little bit. One thing we know maintenance is due on, or major refurbishment is due on this fire station or that fire station. If we had a master plan, we could sort of manage that by maybe deferring or making sure that it doesn't happen at the same time. They could be sequential. Maybe some things could be deferred but still remain in the plan. But I guess the important thing is understanding what those projects are and the impact and giving them some kind of priority. Which ones have to be dealt with first. So I think besides just cutting budgets, you need to be doing your planning as well. And it's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Anyone else? 1 second, John. As you know, I'm happy to read every single line of the budget and try to question them about a lot of things. I have a lot of faith that the town is staffing at the level that we can afford. So I think we're going to be facing soon some pushback on, are we talking about cutting services, even if that's just hours the Council on Aging is open, or subsidizing of the transportation, et cetera. So that's something that I would love to see, have a cost savings committee so we can see what creative answers can be come up with. But I think if we're really pushing for no budget increase, we're going to have to consider some recommendations along those lines. That said, I'm still new to this. So if any of you who've been around for longer have recommendations, please share them or ideas. I see you, John. Hold on. Anyone? We have ALG coming up, so I just want to make sure Christine and I can represent the committee's points of view, especially well.
If I can be so blunt, I believe that the upshot of what you may have just heard from this committee as you go to ALG on Thursday morning is a 2.5% tax to max increase this year, like we've been doing for the last 6 years, is not something that this committee is looking forward to doing this year.
That is an interesting combination of a bold statement and soft pedaling it at the very end. Steve.
And when I talk about a cost savings initiative, and it's not necessarily pie in the sky. I'm still worried that the state will cut back aid, and we may be looking to fill a $2 million hole in 22 or 23. So it's not just, like, oh, that's a good idea, let's study it to death. We may have to implement something. And it's best to have people in agreement when times get tough about where we're going to go if we got to go there.
All right. I have one question for Brian, if he is available for it. I believe that on the topic of turnbacks, that Steve Barrett had said that there is a recommended percentage that state organizations or whatever had you all say that. I think it was 3.5% turnbacks is a good level for operating in the municipality. Am I making that up? Am I misremembering?
It's I wasn't aware that there was an actual target of your turn back, unless he was talking about historically what the targeted number has been or what the number has been.
I think it was that there was a recommendation that for operating a town well.
But I don't think there's a policy out there or an actual target. I know at one time we talked about having reserves at a minimum of 5%, which was, kind of DOR's recommendation at one time.
Okay.
But I'm not aware, Christy, of an actual, targeted turn back of a certain percentage. He might have been, again, talking specifically over the historical turn back has been, 3.5%. I'm not sure really where he was going with that.
I just want to make sure that there wasn't a general guideline.
Right, yeah.
Thank you. So no one pay any attention to what I said or the numbers I said there. John.
Yeah, historically the turnback is composed of two pieces. There's unspent money in the budget and also revenues in excess of conservative budget projections. And for much of the last decade, a large part of the turnback was represented by revenues in excess of projections. It's been a little flat the last couple of years. The turnback that you saw this year was, John being very forward thinking and anticipating the worst. And those savings were generated when people left by not filling those spots. And, that creates much more work for, people that are there. And, there was a time in the 1990s to the early part of 2000 when we had a number of failed operational overrides. And the way we made it through was just by not, when somebody left, you didn't fill the position, and then it became overwhelming. And then in 2003, the select board got the political will and said we have to do overrides. And then working with John Chinitz, who I think was chairman of this committee at that time, they planned out overrides in 2003 and 2005 and were very upfront about that. And it got the town back on a good course. In 2002, it was $100,000 in free cash, I think even a little less. So we've been through some rough times before, and you have to be forward thinking. the boards have to have the political will to do things. When you talk about cost savings initiatives, I assume you're talking about school and town. Is that correct?
Yes.
And perhaps giving schools numbers as to what they have to cut. Okay. Well, we'll deal with this on Thursday morning. First discussion.
Thank you for the input, everyone. Christine, could you take us through where we are with the POV and we'll go through a discussion of that?
Yes. All right. Present. And am I really sharing? It says I'm sharing, but y'all can't see anything.
We can.
You can see the point of view?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Awesome. Sorry, I'm working with 2 screens for the first time, so I'm not used to this level of technology. All right, so this is mostly not updated. I've pulled a lot of slides that don't make sense anymore. For instance, ones that present a potential fire station and a potential twin school, because those things are no longer potential. So I think the goal for today is to go through what we have, to have any discussion that needs to happen over slides we should keep or slides we should not keep, anything we should add in to round out our presentation, and thoughts on specific slides. So I'm just going to, in theory, get started with this mouse. All right, so this slide is up to date. These are the current numbers. That is the current unemployment rate in Acton.
Hold on, Christine, I'm going to jump in for a second. Because we're in the shared view, I think, Christine, I can't see everyone, and I suspect Christine can't either. So if you want to say something, stop at a certain point, just yell out.
So, I mean, I think this number continues to be relevant and continues to be useful in telling our story as far as the status of the town, economically speaking. All right, I haven't changed anything on this financial town slide. Obviously, the reserves need to be updated.
Backing up a slide, would we like to add how that has changed over time?
Sure, we can do that. I might just tighten up this graph, this data, rather than a like another slide or anything. I might make everything a little smaller and add a couple more columns just to give a few. You just want a few years, or are you looking for something more 5 to 10, or 2 to 3? Okay.
I don't know. It just struck me as useful when I looked at it, and now that I do further, I don't know. Does anyone else have an opinion?
Yeah, maybe we could just include a graph for what the progression has been over the years.
Specific. Go ahead, Roland.
Median household income on Massachusetts needs to be fixed. $79.83.5 is not good.
You don't think that's right? You think I did something wrong there? Is that what you're saying?
Like
You went European with your decimal points.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know how to.
Ugh, hold on.
I'll have to wait to see what you say on that. How to fix that.
I am using I'm not any longer using this mouse that my husband left up here because it is driving me crazy.
How to fix that or add to that chart?
Let's come back to it later. It might not be useful. Or
Okay,
we might have information elsewhere.
Even if we put last year's number beside it, it shows a change, I'm sure.
Right, right.
That might be year-over-year change might be a better.
Yeah, let me look at a couple of ways to show how this has changed over the years. Obviously, the unemployment rate has significantly gone up.
It also might be more interesting next year than this year. Part of what I'm thinking.
I can't project.
Oh, come
on. I'll do my best. All right. So, all right. So I will look into changing that into a graph that has data over the years. All right. So this slide again hasn't changed. I assume our AAA rating is going to stay. Our SP1 is going to stay. Our tax rate, honestly, I get that we're in a K-shaped recovery, but with a 10% unemployment rate, I'm shocked that we're still collecting taxes at the same rate that we typically do. I have a hard time.
That's totally in keeping with what Steve Noon told us about 6-8 months ago, where he said there is a 2-year lag from when the onset of the recession occurs to when town finances start to feel it.
Yep, I get that. I'm still surprised. And overall, the big numbers, when you add them all up, make sense to me that we would be on a bit of a delay. I'm still surprised that we haven't seen any dings yet in our collection rate. But until we do, this number is still pretty accurate, which is good. Any comments on this slide? It's been in here for a few years.
Oh, good.
All right.
We may want to put a footnote or something just saying that we are monitoring this.
Sure.
Due to the recent pandemic.
Yeah.
Just because it's something of a concern.
Absolutely.
Or a potential concern, I should say.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't worked on any of the language as far as speaking to the slides go, so that will definitely play into
and
most
maybe
of
that's
these
the best
slides.
way to do it is to do it whoever's as we're talking to this.
Yep. Okay. This number, I know that I updated the median home value. I'm not sure I've updated everything, but it continues, I believe, to be useful information going forward. So when I get the up-to-date numbers, this again helps tell the story of how Acton families are faring. Actually, I think that did go up. That is the new median tax burden for Acton, and this is another one that actually might benefit from a graph because we just jumped significantly.
Yes,
in our median tax burden.
We used to have a graph.
So we have this, which is
confusing.
So unfortunately, the Census Bureau has changed what it's reporting. We used to want the median family tax bill and only be able to have the average. And now we are able to get the information for median and not the information for average, though I'm sure I can find it somewhere else. So I would need to redo the graph with the median information. But I feel that there's a good chance it's going to be a little shocking to see Acton's graph line once that change is made, given our new spending.
Given our previous discussion, I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I just don't want the our tax line to look like an Al Gore, hockey stick forecast, which is, it could turn out that way. The chart would look like a hockey stick where it's just really rapidly goes up at the end.
I think nobody wants it to look that way.
No.
But we're not gonna hide the facts.
But right,
Yeah.
but it's gonna look like what it looks like, so I'll put it together and we'll see. But it might be worth pulling this out of the appendix this year and putting it back into the main presentation now that we have less slides. And I know
I don't think we want the comparison slide.
you want just the Acton one.
I think just Acton and showing the change over time would be good, especially given our argument later on that taxes should not increase this year.
Yep.
Sahana?
The comparison slide can still stay in the appendix, maybe not remove it completely because we need to see where we stand and it's good to show people that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks. Yeah. Okay.
And now Mike and Sahana are on the screen I can see and no one else is, so please jump in.
All right. I can see you all, just so you know. But I also prefer this open discussion a little bit, if that's okay with Christy.
Oh, certainly.
All right, so I'm waiting on these numbers from John Mangiarotti, but this was a new slide that we put in last year, and I found it to be incredibly useful when talking about the point of view with any of our audience. Acton definitely thinks of itself as a school town, but I think this makes it pretty obvious how much of the town shoulders the burden for the school portion of the town.
After our debate about the small business grant fund, I got wondering if we could stick somehow on this graph or something similar how much of the town is businesses.
Oh.
And it doesn't fit quite in these numbers is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But how much of our tax revenue, I know it's not going to be a big chunk, but they are non-voting members of the town who contribute.
89 and 11.
Would that be on the next slide, maybe? Oh, no.
Yeah, this is just, yeah, these are just what we voted on at the last town meeting. These are the budgets that I think people, obviously not everybody goes to town meeting, but I think people easily lose track of the size of the numbers that we vote in within like the first 30 seconds of town meeting, with very little discussion. And so.
Yeah, I think the commercial tax contribution is only about 10% of our budget. Everything is what?
89 and 11.
Yeah, 11%.
The commercial real estate tax is about, real estate taxes are about 92% of our income. And the breakdown between commercial and residential is I think it's 88% residential, 12%.
Right.
So do we want something that kind of shows how this is all funded? Residential taxes, commercial taxes?
We used to have that forever ago.
Yeah, we did. I mean, I think maybe since this is the spending pie chart, a revenue pie chart that just shows where we get our money, and the components being, property taxes, which we can split between residential and commercial, and then state aid and local receipts and things like that.
Okay. I think there's room
Yeah,
for that.
I think Brian does that, or Steve Barrett does it for, it's always a chart on the annual report.
I think a lot of these numbers are probably in the ALG spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we can definitely.
I can help with getting those numbers. So as you guys said, the split right now is 89-11. So 89 residential, 11 CIP, so commercial, industrial, personal property. But yeah, it's readily available. So those can be easily accessed. No worries.
Okay, fantastic. This number, this was the debt service. Should we vote yes on all of the debt which we did.
They changed the colors. It's now ABS to RSD debt and town debt.
But for the fire station, oh, it does have it, the fact that we pushed out the financing, it looks like.
Yes.
Great.
Yes. I should, since this is last year, be able to get another year onto the graph. But I do think it's interesting to look at in this way, that the debt falls off from old projects, the new debt comes on, and then by 2026 we're almost at the same levels. But these of course are the years when we're going to also suffer potentially from the COVID effects, and they're also the years when we're going to be spending the most on our debt service over the next few years.
Should you be putting the fire station in now with the town?
Probably, except that my one issue with that town item is that I don't know what's in there. So I'll find a way to group them, but I also like.
I like it being separate because we haven't fully bonded it yet. So keeping it separate now just until after next year when it becomes a whole big thing. So
I believe that the town debt, and Brian can confirm this, but I believe it's like when we bought a couple of years ago, 3 years in a row, we bought new fire vehicles, new fire engines, at $600,000, $675 a pop. I think those are in there. Any other ones who had debt exclusion or things like that were bonded, I believe are in that town number. Would that be correct, Brian?
The bulk of the town debt is going to be the public safety facility, so that's going to be the major component of the town debt. And Roland, you're correct. Some of the fire apparatus is probably in there, but also some of the fire apparatus is being paid out of the enterprise fund as well. So I'm assuming that this is all general fund debt. I've got lots of data and spreadsheets on debt, and I split it out in many different ways. So I'm sure we can tie out the numbers and get the detail behind the general fund debt by component. And we've got lots of data on that. I'm sure we can get that to you guys.
So when is it public safety building? When does that debt roll off?
So that was a 20-year bond, I think, and we issued that, I think, in 2004. So that's 2024, I think. That's why you see that significant decrease in 2024. It's either it's paid off in 2023 or the last year, which may be just a small component, is 2024.
So the public safety building was taken out in 2002 as a debt exclusion.
Was it authorized in 2002? Was that the first year we borrowed, Jason?
Tough to say.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're getting close, and I think that's the significant drop-off, because that's the major component right now on our records as far as debt service. It's the public safety facility.
Do you know how much that, off the top of your head, how much that is a year right now?
Off the top of my head, I don't.
Okay, I was just curious.
I'm not sure.
Is there no Parker Damon building in there?
No, that got shunted over to the town, over to the school district.
Okay.
Yeah.
Christine, the Minuteman number there, I assume doesn't take into account the increased payment we'll have with increased enrollment.
No, so that'll need to be updated. I think it was a flat number when we first assumed this.
Yeah, the ALG spreadsheet has at least the estimate for 2 years out.
But that wouldn't be in debt service, though. The debt service would only be for what is being bonded.
Yep, you're right. Thank you.
And what we bonded the polls last December.
Okay, so that shouldn't change. Thank you.
So what would we do with the? They're coming back for another $4 million bonding. How would we pay for our portion of that?
We've already voted to exclude it. It's going to come straight from the top line. But I mean,
that's the upcoming one. Okay.
We don't have any future say in it. We've already voted. We're already committed.
Got it. All right.
And we voted to exclude it. So It's all coming from top line.
So that's the orange top level. Okay. And I need to take out the estimate because it's going to happen.
which, Christine, please tell me if this is the right time for me to bring this up, but I would like for the committee to make a recommendation about the payment of the excluded debt. We have said for years that, for at least 3 years, that we wanted the reserves to be used for one-time costs, especially large capital projects. We have also concurrently said, set a reserve floor and a reserve ceiling. Since we are, for the 3rd year in a row, we are above our reserve ceiling, and now that we have substantial incurred and excluded debt for Minuteman, the new twin school, and the fire station, I would like for us to take, and I don't want to do it all in 1 year, I think this is going to be, that would be too painful. I would like for us to take a 3-year plan to take our reserves and bring them down to the floor, or even just slightly above the floor. So it's a mathematical calculation. We take our reserves, add them all together, figure out what the floor is, and then cut it up into thirds so that we hand that off to cover the top level excluded debt and bring us down to much closer to our floor. So I don't know if that's the right time to bring that up. Floor plus a little bit. Time to bring this down. I heard too many times over the last year, well, since we have all these reserves, let's go ahead and do these other initiatives. And I'm no longer willing to look to the town as being good arbiters of our money. So it's time to fulfill our commitments of doing what we said we would, which is using reserves for capital programs, and it's time for us to bring it down much deeper towards the floor.
Opinions, responses?
Is silence agreement?
I'm blown away. I have to think about it.
Yeah, Mike, we know where you stand. I would agree that we have a ceiling on our reserves and we're above it, and we've been above it. And we either need to change our reserve policy or get within it, or recommend getting within it. I don't know about bringing it down to the floor, but we at least need to bring it down to the ceiling.
And if we're also looking to have a minimal tax increase, now is the time to use those reserves, because we've said for years we're holding this for these large purchases. Guess what? We've made the large purchases. It's time to pay it. It's time to use what we've saved up for the purchases that we've incurred.
No, Jason, are you recommending that we pay down some of this debt? It doesn't work that way, right?
It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way, but and by no means do I want to pay down debt that we've been able to incur at 2.1%. By all means, let's hold that note as long as we possibly can. So no, I'm not encouraging prepayment of debt. I'm saying that when you sit there with the ALG spreadsheet, you're going to see a top line number of automatically incurred expense for excluded debt. That excluded debt number is going to be the largest number we've seen in 20 years. Actually, on an absolute value basis, it's going to be the largest number we've ever seen. As a percentage number, it's going to be the largest thing in 20 years. So I'm saying let's use a large percentage of our reserves in 3 tranches so that we're not rating it all in 1 year, because that's not very smart in case something bad happens. Let's use the excess reserves in 3 tranches and step it down and apply it directly towards that capital, that excluded debt top line item on the ALG number. That number on the ALG spreadsheet is still going to be much larger than what we could possibly spend in a year anyway.
Is the public service facility debt, is there a prepayment penalty, or are they callable bonds, or what could we do?
I don't know. I'm not talking about prepaying any of the outstanding debt, Steve, unless it turns out that is at a 6% note and we can do better.
Well, it's
I'm
not a
talking-
2.5, I don't think.
It's not a 2.5. But I wasn't specifically saying a prepayment, unless you're coming up with a different topic, Steve. I'm not specifically saying prepayment of any.
Well, I'm just curious as to what rate it's at and whether we could actually prepay something.
Brian, paging you.
That might be the way to do it. The other thing to look at too is if we need a new fire truck coming up in the next 2 years or some other big municipal purchase, and we have the money in reserves that we're in excess of the ceiling, we can always use that money to do that, so we're not bonding that. That's another way to look at it too.
Well,
If we buy 3 new police cruisers next year, we'll use some of the reserve money, and we're okay. I mean, I agree with Jason. Maybe 3 years might be too much, but maybe you could do it in 4 or 5. Maybe I'm not talking about going to the floor. I'd be more happy in the middle.
yeah, Jason, I agree with you in principle, but going back to your earlier statement about the fact that the tax collections tend to diminish 2 years after a recession, maybe we should plan ahead for that a little bit, and account for that possible decrease in revenues now before we significantly wipe out the reserve.
So I hear you. I would say that we're already 1 year into it, or at least one budget cycle into it. So that's why I think 3 years is reasonable, because that gives us 2 years to catch up, even if there is a large hit. But I believe that we need to be aggressive about it, because even this year we have squandered multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars because we've had public officials state, well, we've already got the money, so let's just do it. We need to remove that disincentive to wasteful spending. So that's why I'm trying to move quickly.
Mike?
I mean, the reserve is a reserve for a reason, right? It doesn't need to be all spent down.
Well, that's why we have a floor in place. That's why we have a floor in place. I agree entirely. That's why we have a floor.
I was just going to ask, considering that our Standard & Poor rating is excellent, and the interest rates out there in the bond market are extremely low, are they actually buying? Is the market actually buying bonds? Is there a market out there currently? I know at one time they were in a fairly recent past, but the rates were low, but no one was buying. So I think we have to be cautious moving forward if we're looking to go to the bond market in the near term.
Mike, I think there's always a market out there for municipal bonds, because as municipal bond funds of the world, people are looking for a safe harbor. They're looking to keep their money safe. A lot of it now get a little bit of turmoil, so the bond funds have had a big increase or a big run-up, and money funds have to be safe, etc. So as municipal bonds roll off that they had on the portfolio, even if it's at a higher rate, they have money they have to put to work, and they have to replace that. So what do? They have to go and buy bonds still. Now the appetite may not be as much as it was before, but there's still institutional investors that are still going to be buying municipal bonds on the marketplace, no matter what. I just don't know how much of that appetite will be out there.
Dave, since you're in this field, would you like to weigh in at this point, if I may? If not, I'll make Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to make another comment.
Really, but Dave, do you have something first?
You may have stepped away. It's dark.
Yeah, okay.
So I would respond, Roland, that there was absolutely a period of time there where when the town tried to go out and take a bond for the fire station, the market had seized and they were not able to do so. That day has passed, and the demand for municipal bonds is still, and again, I'm going to defer to Dave because this is his field. Well, this is very closely related to his field. if you look at the yields currently, you can't have yields this low without having quite a bit of desire to buy. If there's actually been a problem in getting funding, then the yields would necessarily be on the rise rather than on the fall. Dave, would you care to add to that, please?
I didn't catch all the conversation because it's this insane part of the day called bedtime. And my wife's unfortunately out of town, not able to help. But just if you're talking about the rate that Acton could borrow at now, I forget what it was a couple months ago, but it was rock bottom low. And I don't think there's really any reason to believe that it's going to be any higher than that. Interest rates are still very low. The demand for municipal bonds is still extremely high. I couldn't quote you off the top of my head what Acton debt where it trades in the market right now, but I think it's extremely competitive to anything we have on the books historically. I thought I heard a part of the conversation about taking out some existing debt. And I generally think you would do that if you had a real reason to. If there's some, maturity profile or something else you wanted to sort of manage. But away from that, I think it's been very favorable for a while to borrow, and and it will probably be that way for the foreseeable future. There's little belief that rates are going to go up dramatically in the next year or so. Just to take a sidebar, but the Federal Reserve is obviously very active in the markets. There's very little inflationary pressure, and this changes, on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis. But I forget the numbers that Acton issued those new bonds at, 3-4 months ago. But I talked to our municipal portfolio manager quite a while about it, and it was at an extremely competitive rate. And the way they actually price these is a staggered sort of maturity over time. And it wasn't immediately easy to see exactly what the yield was, but in some cases, depending on how the market demand is, they may price some of the bonds at a discount or some at a premium. Anyways, all that aside, it's a very healthy market if you want to borrow money. And I'm not encouraging us to borrow money just because the market is very strong, but the rate the town would get and the school district would get is very, very competitive.
So if I may, Madam Chairman, two quick follow-ups to that. One, Mr. Wellenhoff, do you believe there's any risk to us not being able to take out a bond over the next couple of years? And secondarily, is there anything on the radar that we're thinking about possibly having to purchase, or are in the large purchases that we've just made in the last year, have we removed the near-term requirements for any kind of borrowing to begin with?
I'm not sure about the second question, but the first question is, I think you alluded to it earlier. 5 months ago, plus months ago, there was a short window there of a few weeks, maybe a month and a half, where it was really difficult to borrow. The market is certainly stabilized now, where a lot of, in my world, high yield companies, the riskiest names, they're borrowing money very actively. So the bond market for municipal bonds is certainly very strong right now, and it's unusual for it to get out of whack as it did earlier in the year. But that just was that limited window at the very beginning of the pandemic taking hold when there was enormous uncertainty out there. But I can't answer the second question about the near-term needs of the town and what they would need to borrow off the top of my head. I think that was a broader question.
I was trying to find out, there had been discussion of the town having a capital plan upcoming, but I'm not finding any of my information about it. I know we've requested one.
I know it's listed at the beginning of the town warrant.
Thank you.
So based on this conversation, I actually thought it was useful to pull this slide up. It's not in the current point of view. It wasn't in last year's point of view, which was so large. But especially for Isha, and just a quick reminder of what our convoluted, complicated reserve policy happens to be. Do we need to put this back in the point of view, or is it okay if we just know what it is and operate off of the assumption that we're all on board with this?
If it's not in the point of view, ALG is going to ignore it.
I think it should go back in as well.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. I will transport it over.
Thanks, Christine, for pulling it up.
You're welcome. I realized that we were having a conversation about it, and I wasn't even sure if you had seen any sign of what it was, but this is what it, apparently the year before I came on board, there was a lengthy debate about what the policy should be, and this is where it landed. And so I will include it in the point of view. Okay. So that was basically the state of the town section of the point of view. And then we move on to our concerns and recommendations. And again, I have not updated much of the data on these slides. We do have a 9.9% unemployment rate, but these numbers are from last year's slides. We don't have an expected state revenue shortfall. If I understand correctly, it's going to be level funded. But the third bullet point definitely holds that we still need to be on the lookout.
Hold on. The state no longer has a revenue shortfall?
I think they do. They haven't actually said there's going to be a impact on us.
Oh, right. Sorry, you're right. Yes, I misspoke.
Brian, has the state finalized a budget?
Not at this point, they haven't.
Okay, so they're still on a 1/12 budget?
Yeah, but as Steve had mentioned then, that, I mean, the state's probably gonna have a shortfall, but they're not saying that they're anticipating that it's gonna impact the cities and towns. They're gonna try to keep us whole. That's what we're hearing right now, but more to come on that.
Yeah, what they've said is the two pockets of state aid we get, the unrestricted state aid and the school aid, would be level funded.
Okay. So I'll update that, but I might be looking for some more information now that we know more about what this particular recession looks like, to fill this slide in with, how we think it might impact us going forward.
Hold on, for the bottom bullet point, do we want to put something in about convening a cost savings committee, analyzing cost savings across?
You know what, I think, so if this is our concern slide,
Gotcha.
our recommendation slide, I think that's a really good idea. But does it go under recession concerns or does it go under reserves? Because it's not really so much, is this cost savings that we're talking about in response to our current financial situation or our continued turnbacks and operations in general, regardless of recession?
I would see it as something that's in reaction to the recession, the current situation.
Okay, all right, then this is where it would go. Okay, so on this slide, I will add it in as a bullet point. Do we still recommend a freeze on hiring, discretionary spending, and land purchases? I know that the town manager is looking to do some hiring because they have seen regular revenue coming in and operations picking up a little, and they're finding the need to backfill some positions that they held on. Do we have any changes we'd like to make to this language here?
Consider placing a freeze.
Right?
No,
Well,
that's too soft. We're looking further out. We can say place a freeze on non-essential hiring if we think it needs to be in here.
I don't think they're doing any non-essential hiring now anyway, but I
Yeah.
want them to be extra judicious in when they pull the trigger on such a hire.
Right. And since we feel that way, you know, we're not actually recommending a total and complete freeze. We are, so perhaps just saying non-essential is the way to get that point across.
No, I think non-essential is too weak, right? I mean, they're going to say that everything's essential.
Mike?
No, I would just recommend that, you know, you give him a bottom line that's maybe flat, and let him manage with, you know, between the boundaries. You know, he could juggle hiring, discretionary funding, spending, and purchases, whatever. But just give him a bottom line budget and let him manage it with however way he sees fit. But you're not going to do a line item review. You know, let him do his job, and he's been doing an excellent job so far. And we just have to, you know, give him that. You don't want to tie his hands.
Should we change this to don't increase taxes this year?
It
That's
could
the
be
point of the freeze, right?
right. It could be don't increase taxes and look for you know and
Mike likes that.
the cost saving committee to look for measures to continue to find ways to save. And that could be the point of this particular slide.
Are we agreed?
All in favor? All right.
Hold on.
Yep.
Second bullet point seems
So I
like
think
it should be removed.
yeah. So I think I think what we're talking about doing is saying don't increase taxes and not just create a list of cost saving measures, but convene a committee. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think so.
All right.
Is this the spot for my recommendation about using reserves?
I think so.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, unless we want to do it under our reserve policy recommendation slide.
That's probably a better place for it.
Yeah, actually.
It might be. So, we still.
I just worry about it.
This.
I worry about it getting lost, right? You know, the final recommendation slide is the sort of the lead behind. It's the marching orders for going to LG. So I just worry about it getting lost. Yep. If you're comfortable with being farther back in under the reserves, as long as we hold to it as a recommendation that we expect LG to honor, then I'm fine with it.
We're not, as I understand it, currently saying that we should use the reserves rather than increase the taxes, are we? You're saying that we should use the reserves for, well, are we saying use the reserves for capital projects we would otherwise put in the budget?
I'm saying that I would like us to see the reserve to get used for these capital projects, for the excluded debt projects over a 3-year period. If that's in a vacuum of the total taxation raise, so be it. But I believe it can be a standalone feature. It actually, by making it be a standalone feature, it actually frees up some money elsewhere. Because what this ends up being functionally is a greater use of reserves than we've used in the past. So it may end up making their life easier by doing what I recommend. They may be able to get to this no taxation increase level with by being able to leverage this larger use of reserves. I'm just trying to fence off and justify how and where I'm planning on having these reserves be used. Does that make sense? I'm
still a little lost on the relationship between this and the debt exclusions?
Let me write it up as a mathematical formula with an explanation and send it to the committee.
Thank you.
We, back in ancient times, we came into a windfall of money from the money that had been set aside from the transfer station to be closed, actually. And we actually did have line items on the ALG plan, and it was to be totally devoted to capital.
On the first page?
Yeah.
Okay. I assume we would like those back, and Christine and I should ask for that.
Okay. I'm gonna do some work on this whole presentation and send it out to the committee for thoughts and edits to slides. So if we don't get everything on the slides today, obviously, fear not. I will be coming to you for more. These compensation percentages aren't up to date, but I don't think they're going to change significantly anytime soon. We've gone into more 4-year contracts that continue the trend.
I don't know about that for the school, though. They've lost some teachers, but had to hire new teachers. I don't remember where the final numbers worked out. Because of adding the remote academy.
Yep. I'll get updates. Do we know anything about the Middlesex assessment at this point? I know there was a lot of fear that that fund would take a hit, and so our assessment would increase beyond the 6%. But that, we know if that's turning out to be true. I see that Brian is gone.
I think it's too early.
Okay. Are you still concerned that that will be the case, Steve?
Yeah, their investment portfolio probably still took a hit because they're not buying Alphabet stocks and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if they took a pretty big hit still.
Okay.
Even if the markets come back, it probably hasn't come back in the stuff they're allowed to invest in.
Okay. All right. So, I don't think that this needs to change much. We still are saying for the town and the school, no, freeze hiring wherever possible. I assume we're still in agreement on this language, but we did just have an earlier discussion that we know more now. There's less volatility. Do we need to leave this in here at this time?
We did take out quite a few things from the previous slide, right? So it's kind of the same things. We decided to take it off that slide, but it's all back here. So do we want to remove the slide because we have the things, because you're forming a different committee to look into it?
That's a good point.
Can you go to the previous slide? I'm sorry.
I think we should. I do like the bullet point, the last bullet point, that I think we need to maybe put down the previous slide.
We can combine a couple of our slides, combine the concerns and the recommendations in one slide, and maybe the answer is that this is covered, as Sahana said, in our recommendation for the panel to look for cost saving initiatives. This isn't necessarily, we don't necessarily have to call this out anymore. And then we move the prepare for growth in Middlesex right up here below Middlesex assessment. And then we can speak to this slide as one instead of having two. Unless somebody has more to say as far as recommendations go.
Do we want to put on the table the cost of examining services. The potential of cutting them. Not that it is something we plan on doing, but should be looked at as a possibility.
I wouldn't explicitly state it because that'll get people's hackles up. But I think removing language saying that it should be protected at all costs might be reasonable.
Now, Steve, you were the main driver behind this point last time. Do you still take that stance?
I still think we should have it in there. I guess we could soften the language.
I don't think it hurts to give it another year.
No.
No, that's fine.
Because we're going to be doing this for another year.
We are specifically supposed to be looking further out.
Yes, this is true. So maybe short term, protect our services. Long term, see our panel that's going to look for cost saving initiatives. So maybe I'll split it out, and we'll have a couple of short term recommendations and a couple of longer term recommendations. Does that make sense?
That would make sense. I think cutting the staff in the crisis is not the best thing we could recommend. Looking for possible synergies and efficiencies next year is something we should do. And if we can make some positions redundant, then by all means, we should do it. But I wouldn't say that it's the first thing we ought to be talking about this year.
Okay, I agree with that.
Prepare for growth in the Middlesex assessment. Steve, you talked about health insurance. Now, is this a place to discuss that?
Yeah, we did meet. We didn't do much. We are gearing up to make a recommendation, but we also have to figure out what the impact has been on the trust in terms of COVID expenses. You know, as you recall, all the major carriers went, "Oh yeah, we'll waive all those copays on COVID testing." But you know, when it's Blue Cross and you're insured by Blue Cross, then it's Blue Cross doing it. When it's Blue Cross and they're acting as the agent for Acton Health Insurance Trust, then it's us paying for that copay. And we know we've got some impact. It doesn't seem really significant at this point. I don't think we're going to have too big a problem with healthcare increases this year. It's early yet.
Okay. Are you good with this, Christy, for now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think that OPEB is the same story.
School had I saw a report. They did pretty well this past year. Haven't seen the town one, so I can update them.
That would be great.
No, my understanding is that they are still operating on the philosophy of paying down something else that's eluding me right now.
Middlesex.
They think they're going to pay Middlesex first and then put all their money in OPEB.
Okay. Do we have any recommendation change regarding that? Do we want to argue with them about that?
No, it is a logical thing to do. But my experience with Middlesex is it may not be in practice something that works out.
Yeah.
We never seem to get ahead of Middlesex.
So should we update the OPEB slide to make it a little more explicit?
Well, let me look at the numbers. Like I said, I saw a report that looked like schools had a pretty good year as far as OPEB goes.
Okay. I mean, we've kind of had in our plan for the last few years that we want them to increase their funding.
they're
But
still well behind the town in terms of.
right, but I think that the you know, the schools are bearing the brunt of juggling how to stay in budget during COVID times. And
Yeah.
while this is our long-term recommendation, we're certainly not going to hold their feet to the fire to do anything in the next year or so.
No.
So, but long-term, we would like them to increase their funding by 100,000 per year until they get to the 1.6 million number.
Right.
Okay. Any other future capital projects that we know of? I clearly need to go look at the town's plans and add to this list, but any off the top of anybody's head to add to this slide? Okay. All right. I don't think this, I mean, we can read it, but it seems like we still believe this.
You might want to put on the first bullet, underneath the first bullet, since is bringing outside funding where possible. I'd say continue.
Yeah.
John's done a good job of being able to bring in
Yep.
outside funding. Example being the Asa Parlin House, right, the library there that he's brought funds in for other initiatives, and I think that would you know, being able to put up more charging stations, etc. So I think that's a good idea, that you can continue to
Yep.
continue to look for outside funding where possible, and continue outside funding where possible, you know, grants, whatever.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, he's done a great job with that. I'm gonna look. John's mentioned a few times that he has a capital improvement list that it's on. It comes in the town warrant. So Christy, I guess. Well, I'll look at it and see and share it with the group, and we can discuss later if it sort of meets this need or if we're looking for something more detailed and specific, and then we can try to work with them on what we're looking for this. But
And I think towards Jason's idea, see if there's anything in there that we think would be a especially good way to use some of our reserves.
yeah, we can make a recommendation in that light, both in this packet, in this slide, and potentially in the reserves slide.
I don't think we need to look for anything else to spend our money on. I think when we actually look at the numbers, when you see how much our new debt is for these three large, the Twin School, Minuteman, and North Acton Fire Station, I think you'll find that we will deplete the reserves and get to the floor very quickly. But as I said, I will send along hard numbers.
Are you saying to pay our bills for that excluded debt using reserves?
Yes, explicitly.
Okay.
In the three-year step down tranche.
That's what I wasn't understanding. Thank you.
Just a comment. I think we had looked ahead and called the Board of Selectmen a select board in here, so which is a good thing.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
It's not official.
Move that way.
It's not official yet. Not official yet.
Not official yet, but yeah, we are already done that year, so last year.
You are. I'm on board. Okay, so speaking of reserves, I need to add a year onto this slide. Brian, do you know what the 2020 reserve number is? Well, anyway, I will add that on from Brian as soon as we have it.
Yeah, my only comment there, Christine, is I think at the bottom we should identify, is that fiscal year? So when you look at in 2019, or is that June of 2019? So that was the certification of June of 2019 was $5.8 million. So we don't have our 2020 certification. We'll be submitting that to State Department of Revenue. We should have something hopefully in the next couple of weeks or so. So we can get you an updated number there. But I'm wondering why 18 and 19 are the same number. We'll have to look at that.
Okay, I'll work with you on this slide and make sure I've got up-to-date numbers. And
Yeah, and because I think at the bottom there, we just need to identify, you know, those years. What is that year? Is that the calendar year in which that was certified, or is that the year in which that money is available to spend? And so those are two different things, but I think we need to clarify that.
Okay.
There's an implication here that this is the amount that we are spending from reserves every year, or that we have historically spent from reserves.
Because of the bullet point?
With the bullet point, we never define what this chart is. And the bullet point says, stop depending on reserves to fund the operating budget. So having not looked at this in a long time, I thought was, oh my goodness, we spent $5.8 million.
No, that's just the amount in reserves.
I agree. I understand. I'm saying I think we need to clarify
Okay.
what this is.
That's right. It's deceiving, or it's not deceiving, but it's misleading, I guess.
Yeah.
It sounds like that looks like the amount of money we're spending, but it's not.
Okay, I'll clean it up, Christy, so that it's clear for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I was shocked when I read that number.
That would be shocking.
Shocking to us all.
Right? So then here in our reserve policy, and maybe I do some magic on this slide to indicate what our reserve floor recommendation and our reserve ceiling recommendation are, so that when we get to this slide, we can possibly, if we so desire, recommend spending to some portion of reserves so that we are within our own guidelines. So we can work on that language as well. And Jason, I'll work with you on what you would like to see in here as well.
Thank you.
So I think the only land purchases this past year were CPC funds. Do we still need to call out land purchases at this time?
Was that Ishma?
Yeah, what is the most recent land purchase that was approved at the town meeting in here too?
So it's not. That sort of came onto the scene very late in the year. We usually get this point of view done. Of course, we amended it, but we usually get it done sort of by the end of October. And that particular property didn't become available until after town meeting, which is why it ended up a special town meeting. So these were purchases that had been made that sort of highlighted our concern with buying property without knowing exactly what we were supposed to do with it once we got our hands on it.
Okay.
Obviously, the Great Hill purchase, the Piper Lane purchase was not through town fund, it was through CPC funds. It was a different funding model, but we also had a plan worked out. So it sort of, it met our guidelines.
So it's a different category. I get it. Okay.
There were a string of land purchases that sort of caught our attention and made us feel that we needed to highlight it in our point of view, that without knowing what we're going to do with the land, we end up with land and then form a committee to decide what use it can be. And in the meantime, we're losing tax revenue and, you know.
Yeah, so we should be a little more strategic about land purchases, in other words, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with Isha. I think we could probably boil this down to one or two lines rather than a whole slide, and just say, you know, that between 2016 and 2019, we spent whatever it is, $3-4 million on land without knowing what to do with it, and we have foregone X amount of tax revenue.
I like it with the detail because it allows each parcel to be exclusionary so that they don't get mixed up with things like Piper Lane purchase, which I think have a more viable acquisition purpose.
I agree. I like detail. I wasn't complaining about that.
We, at some point, called out the Maple Street lot as a property we actually agreed with the purchase of.
Yeah, so,
Yeah,
yes. Yes, it says on the concerns recommendations for land purchases that the parking fees pay for that purchase. So I think it was more an example of, this is actually a good use. It was a strategic purchase. Whereas
And now
53
that-
River Street.
It's gonna take longer to pay back because obviously,
Yeah,
you know,
well, who could have, who could have known?
yes.
nobody would have known that, and I think that was an example where, and I'll back onto 348, 364 Main Street. That was a good purchase. I think the 340 to 364 Main Street will become one when they get that housing for seniors and disabled built. And why it was bought was to get out of a lawsuit. So that will prove, I think, in the long run will be a good thing. The 53 River Street, we now own a dam that we get to repair. So that wasn't a good one. So I think it's somehow tying those two slides together, saying, you know, buy something where it makes sense, but have that plan going forward. With 1921 Maple Street, they had that right from the beginning, and that made a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think you disprove our message, Roland, if you suggest that because we have figured out a positive thing to do with the Main Street land, that it wasn't a mistake. It sort of disproves our suggestion that we know beforehand rather than letting things sit for a few years and then because it all worked out, it's okay.
Yeah, I agree with that part of it. Yes, you're correct.
Okay.
I think
River Street, in my opinion, has been an absolute waste of money.
Can I jump in? So at this point, maybe we should add the Piper Lane purchase to in here, only to be fair, because we're talking about all of the purchases right now.
we're not talking about all of them.
Yeah, but that's a big purchase too, which just happened. So it's fair enough to go in because we do not.
I think we need to clarify in some way that, as Christine said before, that's not really the town purchasing it. That's CPC purchasing it. So these fall into a different category. I think Jason said earlier that a number of these purchases were made because we have the money around, and that made it easy to justify the purchase. And that's the sort of thing we want to avoid, as I understand it.
Well, maybe, maybe I get to the point where 2-3 years down the road, do we still, keep this land purchase slide the way it is, or, do we sort of move on? And I think that I can tighten this up and add the Piper Lane purchase, but just like where Maple Street parking fees were meant to pay for the purchase, with Piper Lane, it was CPC funds.
Okay.
It's sort of to highlight both sides of here's where it was done well and here's where it wasn't done thoughtfully, and we'd like it to always be done thoughtfully.
What if
That'd
we
be better. That'd be the way to do it. But CPC is town funds.
ish? I mean, they're very limited use.
They're very limited use, but we did pay for it with our taxes. It wasn't that somebody just gave us money and said they'd use it.
Well, when we paid for it out of our tax bill, the town couldn't touch it.
It's still our tax. It's still our tax money.
So is the school.
Yep, agreed.
I would like something like a positive list and a negative list, something that describes the sort of thing we approve of or not, since this is our point of view.
Sure. All right. I can definitely make that happen.
Just a quick question is, but doesn't that dilute the messages? The message is there's been a lot of land purchases that haven't been fully thought through and vetted, and If you say that, oh, some of them are positive and some are not, I think that's a different category entirely, in my view. On the list here are purchases that haven't gone well, that we've struggled to figure out what to do with, and they were pretty large numbers. But the other list we're talking about is, hey, this has been on the CPC list for a long time. It's a priority property or a priority project or whatever, and the CPC has the funds to go forward with it. This list, in my mind, is in this slide, I think, is just a reminder that, these things need to be thoroughly vetted. And to be fair, particularly since the Walker property, these things have slowed down a little bit. I'm not saying that maybe it's just coincidental, but a lot of the sort of bad purchases have been dormant for the last two plus years. So I mean, the CPC one was clearly the Piper Lane. I think that was a different category entirely. So I hate lumping the two together, just in my opinion, only because it dilutes from the point is we don't have a great history with all these land purchases. Let's be a little more cautious and diligent on them going into them. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Well, can I compromise with you? Because I think that, I agree. And let's just, be bold and say the land purchases have gotten better, and maybe it's because of our message. But I think we have multiple audiences for this presentation, and to your standard taxpayer, they're going to look at this and wonder where the Piper Lane project is, because it is kind of hard to see the difference. So I wonder if the answer is to keep this list the way it is, but to speak to the Piper Lane project when we, just as part of the explanation on land purchases.
I like that, mainly because River Street was supposed to be funded by CPC funds. And if you go to the direction you just suggested, is somebody says, well, what about, Piper Lane and that purchase? And you say, well, that was purchased with CPC funds, preserving that area as part of the Great Hill area, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody says, okay, great. And then you say, but on the other hand, non-CPC funds, town money, and I know they're the same pool, agree completely, but for the sake of conceptualization, that's not necessarily the same, is you say, well, look at this list of other projects. And if nothing else, it's just to make you aware that we need to be a little more diligent. Dollars are limited, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, absolutely. And this is just my personal sticking point is, sometimes these can turn into big ticket items. I mean, $1 million plus, and sometimes we'll argue over 100,000 here, 100,000 there. But buying some of these properties, and then you look at like an Asa Parlin or something, which turns into an ongoing maintenance project, and then redevelopment and so on and so forth. Is it does get expensive maintaining a lot of these. And I'm not going to get on my high horse here, but I like the messages. Concerns, recommendations, land purchases, etc. These are our concerns. We bought some properties. We didn't know what to do with them. We need to figure that out before we buy them. That's our policy, generally speaking, of what Finance Committee believes. That's a fine policy. What do we want to do with this? We don't know. Okay, next.
Yeah.
And Kmart, by the way, didn't pass that SNP test. On a side note, is the Kmart was like, well, this is our chance to get a hold of this property and figure out what we want to do with it. And it was like, I've seen this show before. Like, we're good here. Like, that's a big number. And we don't need to just buy that, just to, decide later on what we want to do with it.
So one of the reasons that this one existed a few years ago was to explain the drop in reserves from a couple of charts before. What happened to the reserves? This is part of the story. Because we do have that drop from the middle of the chart on down. So
I love that. It shows a consequence. Yeah. There's a consequence to making these purchases.
I think we should say that explicitly.
Yeah.
I also like something Dave raised a point of purchasing property has ongoing maintenance expenses, such as I mean, the River Street expense is huge,
And the lost tax revenue, obviously.
but we
But
don't
yeah, I mean,
we don't explicitly spell out the $1.25 million, I think it is, dam that we're gonna have to deal with.
I mean, in addition to the lost tax revenue, you really need to list the other costs as well. Interest, the cost of removing the dam, those type, maintenance. The whole picture needs to be told, the whole story.
I will flesh it out.
and there's opportunity costs. River Street's not a park. It's not this. It's not that. Blah blah blah.
Well, that's the problem with River Street. That was, I think, poorly. It had big ideals, but they really didn't do their homework. They didn't know about the dam and consequences and the liabilities, and shame on us.
But that's the same with Asa Parlin and the Morrison Farm, the farmhouse there. We have a history of buying property that has a significant liability attached to it. Which doesn't mean we shouldn't buy property, we just need to be very aware of what we're getting into.
But it costs less to get rid of the Asa Parlin house than to remediate the asbestos.
Yes, but that's not what we're doing.
I know, I'm still bitter.
Okay. I feel like I have a lot to work with as far as that goes. And then, based on what we do to the rest of the presentation, I will highlight our takeaways, or we will highlight our takeaways. So this again hasn't been changed since last year.
Do we want a slide about the upcoming change in Minuteman assessment with the significant increase in enrollment?
Not a bad idea. If we don't explain it, somebody else might question it.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea to add in.
Okay. I will add Minuteman into this presentation.
You also can move the first bullet point up a little bit on this slide so it doesn't crowd at the bottom. Just a formatting issue.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I would think I should move the last point to its own slide.
Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think, you know what, we had so many slides. This is 22, but we were at like 35 or something, and I cut all the stuff. So I think I was cramming at the end there.
Yeah, I think we should do that. I think just you might want to maybe even list the line that person on it.
Sure, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And I think I said previously, my intention, my hope for this year is to have a presentation that we can present in meeting, but also a presentation that we can record so that people could click on a video link and watch our presentation and somebody speak to it.
Yeah, I know Acton Public TV can do that. That's what I did.
Yeah.
Writing my message for the first time meeting. So definitely worth I think doing that. So it gets it to a broader audience, especially with what we're dealing with now.
And I think in this day and age, we'll get more downloads than we otherwise would have. Because I think people are more used to gaining information that way right now. So I've got a lot to work on. And as soon as I can, I will get sort of an updated version of this out to the committee. And then I'll be looking for you to comment and to question and to redline and to, if there's anything, you look at the whole thing and we're missing part of the message that's important, please reach out and let me know after I send this to you. And this obviously takes a few weeks to get complete. Typically, there's a little committee of us, but I'm happy to continue to just work on it and send it out, get feedback, work on it, send it out, get feedback, unless somebody else feels strongly about taking a bigger role. And the right answer is no, because I'm perfectly happy to do it.
Thank you, Christine.
Christine,
yes.
If you're send materials around. Can someone double check if I'm on the?
I have gotten in touch with them today, and they are in the midst of adding you.
I will make sure it gets to you, Isha.
Thank you.
Have you
All right,
already
that's
been
it.
sharing this, Christine?
Say that again.
Have you already been sharing this over the past weeks?
I have not sent it out. No.
Okay, thank you. I just
Yeah,
wanna
you
make
haven't
sure
missed
we're missing
anything
it.
yet.
Thank you.
Sure.
Christine usually holds on to it to make the edits for us.
Yeah, but you'll be getting copies. You'll have homework to do.
Okay, moving on to Finance Committee business. We have no minutes to approve. We have liaison reports at this point in time. Now, we don't have a specific liaison for town meeting, but I'm wondering if anyone wants to take on having a discussion about how it went, things we should change, if any. Apart from the room being very difficult to get to and find, is there anything we would like to see different for next time? I'll take deafening silence as a no. Okay.
Sahana's got her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Sahana.
Should we lay down ground rules, on how things are presented with articles? Because I know we all own certain articles, but as the chair, I'm pretty sure you kind of know what is happening. But should we kind of put down some rules on what is being presented and how it is presented, or we all just say whatever we want, assuming that it's going to be okay with the rest of the committee? It's something that we can discuss. We don't have to talk about it now. Maybe it can be a separate agenda item before the next town meeting and discuss about it.
Certainly, you all saw my defense of our position and my feeling about us having to view things from a purely financial lens in the presentations that we make. I'm not, just food for thought, I'm not comfortable making a personal call about these things as a chair, mostly because I view this position as a chair of committee of equals. There's not, apart from I get to moderate the discussions and take these comments to ALG, there's no way that I am specifically elevated above anyone. Christine?
I guess this would be for the older members. Historically, has there been any sort of sharing of speeches or presentations prior to town meeting, vetting by the committee, or is it typically just handled by whoever has that article for the evening?
Oh, way back when I was first on the committee, some members, certainly not all, used to write up their comments on an article and circulate them. They didn't necessarily solicit feedback, but just there were more information than anything else. And sometimes in the pre-meeting, before town meeting, we'd go around the room and people would kind of give the gist, like the elevator version of what they were going to say about certain articles. But it was never a policy, never a procedure to circulate your comments for comments.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, when I was on before, on the new members now, Steve, a couple of the committee members would, as you said, give the elevator pitch on what they were going to say, but nothing more than that, really.
Yeah, in my experience on articles that were contentious, we've definitely done this is the highlight of what I'm going to say to, especially if people didn't potentially be caught off guard. The only time that I ever remember circulating comments at length was for the pot speech just a couple of years ago, because that was split three ways. 3 people were for it, 3 people were against it, and 3 people didn't want to touch it with a long 10-foot pole. Then the other thing is we also have to keep in mind open meeting law. So, for example, even just on this most recent meeting, I did solicit feedback from an extremely small subset of two members of the committee to make sure that I was not in violation of any open meeting law, while still properly showing the voted state of the committee.
Okay. I will add to the agenda as we get closer to town meeting, an item for discussion at that point in time on how we want to have a policy on presenting warrant articles, but it sounds like we're not moving towards any sort of a big change towards that. Does anyone else have any committees to report about? Christine.
So I did watch the most recent school committee meeting, but the biggest takeaway from that is actually involving the school building committee. So my report will just come out of Jason's mouth.
Okay. The school building committee has had another 3 steps forward and potentially 3 steps back rather than 2 forward and 1 back. The most important takeaway is that what we are still trying to deal with some unexpected costs in the form of the ledge and the septic changes. Then there is also the next milestone is that within the next I think 3 weeks we're getting the 90% plus schematic. So we're getting to the point where we can finally get to guaranteed maximum price, which is kind of the biggest, most important stage in the building. So we're definitely getting down to brass tacks. We do have within the next 2 meetings, we will be having another value exercise where we have to reconcile and get things back down to a better number. I can tell you it looks pretty dark right now, but then again, I'm not exactly a half full kind of guy. So I don't want to be too gloomy until we actually go through the value engineering exercise that's coming up during the next 2 meetings. But yeah, we've got a couple $1 million shortfall that we need to fix. But we're not officially behind, over budget yet, but we're in risk, and we've got to get this solved before guaranteed maximum price. And I'm sure I missed something, Christine, so please jump in.
Well, they've used the entire contingency. Is that correct?
That's not quite accurate. There are a couple of different contingencies. The total owner's contingency has not been used yet, but the contingency for this planning stage has taken a beating.
Okay, Peter made it. I think Peter said that they used it and they need to go find some more of it because it's a little early to have used it, although much of the contingency usage does happen during this phase of building, but it's good that they're going back to look for some more possible cuts.
Yeah, we're definitely in the value engineering stage at this point. That's all I have.
Jason, are there any expected changes in the usage of the rooms related to COVID? I can't imagine. I mean, they can't change the outline, the design at this point in time.
No, at this point, and we haven't gotten to the final form fit and something else, FF&E budget, which is where we actually get into, do you have cloth chairs or do you have hard plastic chairs, which has a bearing for how it gets cleaned and disinfected. That is one of the last steps. So we haven't gotten to it yet. And I would also say that there could be some wishful thinking that by the time this building is fully open, we've got this particular pandemic behind us. Not to say it's not going to become a topic of conversation as we get to the FF&E budget, but no, at this time there have not been systemic changes as a result of COVID.
Okay. Anyone else? Steve.
The Health Insurance Trust met. We reviewed the unaudited financials for last year. Came in a little better than we were expecting. mostly because of the COVID, just depressed claims for anything else but COVID. Just people didn't go to the doctor a whole lot. Our fiscal year ends in June 30th, so we also reviewed the cash flows for the first couple of months, July and August, but it was pretty hard to draw any conclusions from where that was going. We expect COVID could add about 4% to our claims this year, but we think that there'll also be other claims that the level will be depressed, so we may not actually see that big an increase. And Jim Snyder Grant replaced John Benson as the Board of Selectmen representative on the trust. John, we hardly knew you.
Yeah, I it never started. Peter asked me to take over, and when we were rejiggering liaison assignments, we moved it over to Jim.
I know, you're only on for like a couple of meetings, and then basically we recessed for the summer, and when we came back in the fall, it's gone.
We were trying to expand Jim beyond climate.
Good.
Sahana?
You all got the updates from John about the Board of Selectmen met last week. So the updates are pretty thorough, but I'll just go ahead and say a couple of things. There are a few public forums that's been planned. One is on October 7th. It's about Acton Center design. It's 25% of the design phase. October 13th and December 10th, the town is soliciting input on drive-up windows in additional locations in the town. And then also the town manager, the board approved the town manager's recommendation to hire a sustainability director. So his salary range, they're looking anywhere between 75 and 90K. And they also approved the 8 full members and 2 associate members to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity Commission. 2 more will be nominated pretty soon, because I think the charge is about 11 people. So that's about it from the board.
Anyone else? Dave?
Madam Moderator, I'd like to make a motion that Isha makes a motion.
You don't want my planning board updates?
Yes, please. Do you have any?
Very quick. Just subdivisions at 40 and 46 High Street, one of which had a tree hearing, which the trees will be saved. And the remand hearing for 180 Newtown Road has reached a decision, and the town council is working on wording so they can take it back to land court.
Thank you. Before Isha gets to us, we have currently planned on the 13th is our next meeting, October 13th, at which point we are scheduled to go over the point of view. And then on the 27th, the Finance Department will be presenting us with the audited, hopefully, turnbacks number, the end of fiscal year 20 review, and information about Q1. If there is anything else you would like me to schedule for either one of those meetings, please let me know.
Can I have those dates again, please?
October 13th and October 27th.
Thank you.
Now, Pam Norris was unable to attend today's meeting. She's our school committee for Minuteman representative. They meet on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays. If we would like to bring her in for any reason, please let me know so we can both schedule a different day for us and get on her schedule. If you have any ideas about general meeting topics, please let me know. And Isha, go ahead.
I move that the meeting be adjourned.
Second.
All in favor, we're going to do a roll call vote here. Christine?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Roland?
Aye.
Sahana?
Yes.
Jason?
Aye.
Isha, you can vote.
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
And Christy, I say aye. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.